Now we cross-examine the popular claim, the mark is just a device. It sounds reasonable because devices are visible, measurable, easy to fear. If you can point to a thing, you feel in control, like you can avoid it or outsmart it. But cross-examination starts with simple questions. Question 1. Does Revelation 13 actually name the device? Does it say chip, scanner, implant, barcode, passport, or any other mechanism? It does not. That does not mean technology is impossible. It means the text is not giving us a spec sheet, and we should not pretend it is. Question 2. What does the text name clearly, again and again? It names worship. It names an image. It names coercion. So the record is clear even when the rumors are loud. The chapter is describing forced allegiance, and the mark functions as the enforced sign of participation. Here is a plain way to say it. The crime is not the ink on the contract. The crime is the contract itself. Worship this. The mark is the signature line that proves you complied. The receipt that says you joined the system. That is one faithful reading, a working theory that follows the order of the evidence. And it fits a larger biblical pattern. In Luke 4, the tempter offers Jesus the kingdoms of the world, but only if he will bow. Power is offered, but worship is demanded. That is motive. So when Revelation shows worship demanded first and then pressure applied to ordinary life, it is not random. It is strategy. And here is the practical point for the listener right now. The safest way to be deceived is to stare at the wrong detail. If you obsess over the tool, you may ignore the demand behind the tool. Give me your loyalty. Verdict for this segment. If we talk only about technology, we may miss the spiritual center of the case. And missing the center is how detectives lose the plot. Next, we test the most seductive distraction of all, the headline hunt, because it feels like detective work while skipping the evidence. Picture the scene. You're scrolling, you hear the phrase, the mark of the beast, and the room splits in seconds. One person says it's a microchip. Another says it's a barcode. Someone else says it's a new law, a new app, a new system. And the conversation gets loud fast, because fear loves speed. So tonight, we slow it down. We open the case like a careful investigator, not a rumor chaser. Think of this as a courtroom where claims get tested, not repeated. The witness we call first is the text itself. Here is our ground rule. Start with the text, then follow the order of the evidence. Here is our one guiding question. In Revelation, what is the mark actually tied to? What problem does it belong to? Now, some people will tell you it's all about the mark, as if the mark itself is the crime and everything else is background noise. But in any real investigation, sequence matters. What happens first often tells you what the case is really about. So we bring in Exhibit A, Revelation 13, verses 15 through 17. Let me lay out the sequence in plain language, like reading a timeline on a whiteboard. First, an image is set up and worship is demanded. Second, refusing that worship brings consequences. Third, a pressure point is introduced. No buying or selling without the mark. Notice what comes first and what comes last. Worship comes first. The marketplace comes last. That is a clue. It tells us the money line is leverage, not the heart of the case. The heart of the case is forced loyalty, who you bow to, who you belong to, what you will trade your conscience for. And here is the promise of this investigation. We will be bold where the text is bold and careful where the text is quiet. So hold one phrase in your mind like a fingerprint we won't lose, buy or sell. We will return to it, and when we do, it will make the whole scene clearer. For now, we are simply opening the file and marking the first clue with a red pen. Red herring on the table. Headlines. Every generation wants Revelation to be a code book for this week's crisis. A new law appears, a new payment system, a new global scare, and people rush to say, "This is it." I understand the impulse. Many people are sincere. They want to be alert, not asleep. But the headline hunt has a problem. It skips the witness and interrogates the rumor.
It feels exciting, and it feels safer than the real question, because it turns worship into a trivia game. But the case file does not invite us to play Guess the Gadget. It invites us to watch the sequence. Start with the text. Don't isolate one image. Follow the chain of clues. In our exhibit, the chain is simple. Worship demanded, pressure applied, participation controlled. So here is the courtroom boundary line. If the text does not name the technology, we will not name it for the text. We will be bold where Scripture is bold and careful where Scripture is quiet. Now notice something else in the exhibit. The pressure is not abstract. It lands on daily life, on what you need to function. That is why the line says buy or sell, food, work, bills, medicine, rent, everyday survival. This is not only about money, it is about access. It is about whether you can participate in the normal world without surrendering your loyalty. And that is why the mark matters. Not because it is interesting, but because it is coercive. Verdict for Chapter 1. The mark is not the first clue. Worship is the first clue. The mark is the signature. Forced worship is the crime. And we end with an open case note for the next chapter. How exactly does a system turn worship into compliance? How does an image become a tool of pressure? And why does controlling buy or sell become such an effective lever? Next time, we will reconstruct that mechanism step by step, like forensic analysts rebuilding the scene. No panic, just evidence. And we will ask the uncomfortable question, what would it cost you to say no?
Let's return to the line we circled in red, buy or sell. In any investigation, the smallest detail can be the handle that opens the whole door. People hear that phrase and instantly imagine a future gadget. But before we imagine anything, we ask a simpler question. What does controlling buying and selling actually do? It controls access. It decides who can participate in normal life and who gets pushed outside it. Food, rent, medicine, work, travel. Ordinary life runs through that narrow gate. Now read the sequence again, slowly, like a timeline. First, worship is demanded. Second, refusal brings consequences. Third, access is restricted. No buy or sell without compliance. That third step is not the heart of the case. It is the pressure point. It is how a demand for worship becomes more than a speech. It becomes a system. And systems do not need to scream to be dangerous. They only need to make obedience feel necessary. This is why the case is bigger than curiosity. The mark is not presented as an interesting symbol. It is presented as the enforced proof that you belong to the worship required by the image. That is the mechanism we're reconstructing. Worship becomes a requirement, and the marketplace becomes the lever that makes the requirement stick. Keep the word lever in your pocket. The text is showing us a pattern. Belief is targeted first, then behavior, then participation. And once participation is controlled, neutrality becomes very hard. Now we bring in a second exhibit to clarify the pattern, because Revelation is not written to confuse faithful readers. It is written to train them. Exhibit B is Daniel 3. A ruler sets up an image, a command goes out, bow, a penalty is announced for refusal. Whatever else you believe about end times details, that story gives you a clean template. Image, worship demand, threat, then the test of loyalty. Revelation 13 uses the same skeleton, but expands the pressure from one public moment to an entire way of life. Instead of only a single ceremony, it describes a continuing system where worship is enforced and participation is monitored. That is why buy or sell matters. It is not only about money, it is about belonging. It is about whether you can live normally without giving the demanded loyalty. Here's a working theory that fits the evidence. The mark functions like a membership stamp. You do not carry it because you accidentally brushed against the wrong device. You carry it because it signals agreement.
public, practical, enforceable agreement with the worship demanded by the image. And this is how coercion usually works. It rarely starts with, "We will destroy you today." It starts with, "We will make life impossible unless you comply." Small denials become bigger denials. Access becomes privilege. Privilege becomes reward for loyalty, and loyalty becomes worship, even if the word worship is never spoken in polite society. The text is not asking you to panic. It is asking you to see the shape of the trap.
Myth on the stand. If the world goes cashless, that must be the mark. Cross-examination. Does the text say the mark equals a financial format? No. The text says the mark is tied to worship and enforced loyalty, with commerce used as leverage. A cashless system can be used for many things. By itself, it does not prove the case. The mark is not a spreadsheet problem. It is a worship problem. Now, a second red herring, even more subtle. I can stay neutral. People imagine a middle path. No worship, no mefusal, just quiet survival. But the entire point of controlling access is to squeeze neutrality until it collapses. The pressure is designed to force a decision, bow or be pushed out. That is why Revelation's sequence matters. It is not random imagery. It is a mechanism. Here is today's verdict. Commerce is the handle, worship is the lock, the mark is the signature, the demanded loyalty is the contract. And now we have earned the next question, the one the text wants us to ask. If the mark is a signature of allegiance, what does the other side look like? What is the contrasting sign of belonging to God? Next chapter, we examine the language of forehead and hand, and we compare the mark to the seal, because every counterfeit has an original, and Revelation is careful about that contrast. If the mark is a signature of allegiance, then we need to ask the next obvious question. What does God's signature look like? People fixate on the mark as if Revelation is a puzzle about skin, but Revelation keeps talking about something deeper, identity. Exhibit A is still Revelation 13. The mark is placed on the right hand or the forehead, and access to ordinary life is restricted. Now we bring in Exhibit B. Revelation 7 describes God's servants being sealed on their foreheads. And Exhibit C, Revelation 14 shows the Lamb on Mount Zion, and the faithful with his name and his Father's name written on their foreheads. That is the contrast the book wants you to notice. 2 marks, 2 names, 2 claims of ownership. Revelation is not only warning you about what the beast does, it is showing you how God defines belonging. So let's slow down and ask a gentle clarifying question. Why the forehead and why the hand? To answer that, we do what good investigators do. We check earlier evidence. In Deuteronomy 6, God's words are to be bound as a sign on the hand and as frontlets between the eyes. Exodus 13 uses similar language about a sign on the hand and a reminder on the forehead. In plain terms, that is Scripture's way of saying, let God's truth shape what you think and what you do, your mind and your habits, your beliefs and your actions. That background matters because Revelation is not inventing a new language. It is using an old one to expose a new counterfeit. Notice something else. Both sides fight for the same territory. The beast wants the mind and the hand because worship always aims there. So when Revelation speaks of forehead and hand, one faithful reading is that it is describing total allegiance, what you trust and how you live. Keep that in mind because it turns the question from panic to clarity. The real issue is not the location on your body. The real issue is whose name is shaping your thoughts and directing your deeds. And that is why this case keeps circling back to one word: worship. Now, let's put another claim on the stand, because confusion usually enters through half-truths. Claim: forehead and hand must be literal locations, so the entire meaning is physical.
Cross-examination. In the Bible's own language, do forehead and hand ever function as symbols for thinking and doing? Yes, they do, and we already saw it in Deuteronomy and Exodus. So here is the careful conclusion. Revelation may involve literal enforcement, literal public compliance, even literal visible signs. But the text itself is aiming at something deeper than skin. It is aiming at worship expressed in thought and action. That matters because it keeps you from a dangerous mistake, treating the mark like an accidental infection. In Revelation, the mark is not described as something you cache by touching the wrong object. It is described as something you receive by choosing the demanded allegiance. Now flip the page and look at God's seal. Revelation 7 speaks of servants sealed on the forehead, and Revelation 14 speaks of a name written on the forehead. A name is identity. A name is ownership. A name is loyalty. In Revelation, a forehead is the public face of who you belong to. Counterfeits always imitate originals. The beast does not invent the idea of marking, it corrupts it. It takes the language of belonging and turns it into coercion. Some people imagine the seal like a magic sticker that guarantees an easy life. That is another myth. Cross-examination. Are God's sealed people spared from hardship in Revelation? The book does not promise that. It promises belonging, endurance, and final rescue. Here the earlier evidence helps again. In Ezekiel 9, a mark is placed on the foreheads of those who grieve over evil, and judgment passes over them. That is not a fashion accessory. It is a sign of God's recognition. So, one faithful reading is this: the beast marks people to claim them, and God seals people to claim them. Both are about worship. Both are about identity. And that means the real battle is not first about what will touch your skin, but about what will capture your loyalty, what name will be written over your life in practice. That is why Revelation contrasts a mark with a name. The issue is whose authority you carry, not which gadget you fear.
Now we deal with the red herring that sneaks into almost every conversation. If I can just identify the physical method, I will be safe. That sounds practical, but it is the wrong kind of practical. It turns a worship trial into an engineering problem, and it tempts you to believe you can outsmart the test by moving the goalposts, avoid a device, avoid a system, live off the grid. But Revelation is not describing a test you pass with cleverness. It is describing a test you pass with faithfulness. Here is a simple way to see it. The forehead and the hand are not random body parts. They are a picture of the whole person, what you believe and what you do, what you approve and what you practice. So the question for the listener is not where will something be placed. The question is, what is shaping my mind and what is directing my habits? Because the most dangerous mark is the one you do not notice until it feels normal. Another myth slips in here. God's seal is a secret code that makes you untouchable. Cross-examination. Revelation's sealed people are still called to endure. The seal is not an escape hatch. It is a claim of belonging. In fact, Revelation ends with a picture of the faithful seeing God's face and His name on their foreheads. That is not secrecy. That is open identity. Now let's make the courtroom ruling for this chapter. Verdict. The mark and the seal are competing signatures of worship. One claims you by coercion, the other claims you by belonging. The beast demands worship and then uses access as leverage. God calls for worship and then gives a name, a seal, a true identity. So the goal of this investigation is not to produce panic, it is to produce clarity. Worship always leaves a trace in thought and action. And that brings us to the next clue people obsess over, the number. In the next chapter, we put 666 on the stand. We will ask what the text actually says about a number, a name, and wisdom, and we will separate careful reading from numerology. For now, close the file with this final line stamped on the cover. The battlefield is allegiance, and the evidence shows it starts in the mind and ends in the life.
Let's put the most famous number in Revelation on the stand. 666. The moment people hear it, everyone has a theory. A barcode, a microchip, a credit card, a logo, a vaccine, a secret code hiding in simple sight. The problem is not curiosity. The problem is what curiosity turns into when fear takes the microphone. So we open the case with a clean rule. We do not start with rumors, and we do not start with modern guesses. We start with the exhibit. Exhibit A is Revelation 13, verse 18. The text does something very specific there. It does not shout panic. It says wisdom. It does not say scan. It says calculate. It does not say technology. It points to a number tied to a name, and it calls for discernment. That tells us what kind of clue this is. This is not presented like a trap you fall into by accident. It is presented like a sign you recognize if you are paying attention. Now, remember where we have been in this investigation. The case is about worship and allegiance. The mark is the signature of enforced loyalty. So the number is not an isolated riddle floating in space. It sits inside the same file folder, which means we ask a grounded question. How does a number function in a worship case? In the world of the Bible, numbers often carry meaning, not just math. 7 signals fullness. 12 signals covenant people. Revelation is full of symbolic patterns. So when the text says wisdom, it is warning us not to treat this like a horror movie code. It is inviting a careful reading that connects the number to identity, character, and allegiance. Hold that thought, because now we cross-examine the most popular myth, that if you can decode the number, you can relax. Myth on the stand. If I identify what 666 refers to, I will be safe. Cross-examination question 1. Does Revelation treat this number like a safety password or like a call to faithfulness? The text points to wisdom, not a shortcut. Cross-examination number 2. Does the text say, find the number and you can avoid the test? It never says that, because the test is worship. The number is not the test, it is evidence about the one demanding the worship. Now another claim. 666 must be a modern gadget. Cross-examination. Where does the exhibit point? It points to a number tied to a name, and it invites calculation. That language fits an ancient world where names and numbers can be linked, where people can compute a name's value. One faithful reading, a working theory many have proposed, is that the number points to a specific ruler or imperial power through that kind of name-number calculation. You may have heard suggestions like Nero. You do not have to lock on to one answer to follow the detective logic. The key point is what the text itself emphasizes: wisdom, a name, a number, and the ability to recognize what kind of power this is. In other words, Revelation is not asking you to become a coder. It is asking you to become discerning. And this fits the larger case file. The beast is not just an object of fear. It is a counterfeit authority demanding worship. So the number functions like a fingerprint, not like a time bomb. It tells you something about the beast's identity, its character, its claim. It's a clue that the beast is not divine. It is not perfect. It is human, imitative, and falling short. That is why the number repeats the language of 6. It is a counterfeit that never reaches the fullness symbolized by 7. Verdict for this segment: the number is meant to unmask the beast, not to hypnotize the reader. Now we address the red herring that keeps people trapped for years: numerology as entertainment. Red herring. Endless decoding. People turn 666 into a hobby.
They measure logos, count letters, run calculators, hunt patterns, and post charts. It feels like detective work, but it often avoids the real interrogation. Because while you are busy decoding, you are not asking the central question: who is demanding your worship, and what are they asking you to trade for it? That is the trap. You can spend years solving the number and still miss the demand. Revelation does not treat wisdom as trivia. Wisdom is the ability to see through a counterfeit and stay loyal under pressure. The number is there to expose, not to entertain. It is there to tell you, do not confuse this power with God. It is a stamp that says, this is human, imitative, incomplete. And that matters because worship is always tempted by what looks impressive. So here's the courtroom ruling for Chapter 4. Verdict: 666 is a clue about identity and counterfeit authority, not a gadget code for modern panic. The case still stands exactly where it started: worship first, pressure second, access as leverage. The number does not replace that sequence, it supports it. And now we close this chapter with the final open case note. If the mark is enforced loyalty, if the seal is true belonging, and if the number unmasks a counterfeit authority, then what does faithfulness actually look like when the pressure hits ordinary life? In the next chapter, we move from clues to counsel. We'll build a simple, text-grounded strategy for endurance so the listener leaves with clarity, not fear, and with a verdict that can be lived.
We have followed the evidence. We watched the sequence: worship demanded, pressure applied, access used as leverage. We compared signatures: the mark as coerced allegiance, the seal as true belonging, the number as a clue that unmasks counterfeit authority. Now the case turns from clues to counsel, because revelation is not written to feed panic. It is written to produce endurance. Here is the point. The best time to decide your allegiance is before the squeeze. So what does faithfulness look like in plain terms when the pressure targets ordinary life? Think of this chapter as the closing argument built from the record. 3 rules guide our conclusion. First, be bold where the text is bold and careful where it is quiet. If Scripture does not name a technology, you do not need to name one to be faithful. You need to recognize the demand behind the system: worship and loyalty. Second, keep the sequence. Do not let one dramatic detail steal the whole story. The mark is not the opening scene. Worship is the opening scene. If you train your mind to spot the first demand, you will not be surprised by the final signature. Third, treat faithfulness as a practiced habit, not a last-second improvisation. The pressure in Revelation is designed to make compromise feel necessary. So endurance is not a heroic mood. It is a set of small, steady choices that keep your worship clear when the world gets loud. That is the difference between fear and readiness. Fear stares at the tool. Readiness watches the motive. Fear tries to predict date. Readiness learns the pattern. And the pattern we proved from the text is simple enough for any listener to carry. Forced worship is the crime. Access is the leverage. The mark is the signature. Hold that like a clear verdict in your mind, because clarity is the first form of endurance.
Now, we put 2 popular survival plans on the stand because they sound practical, but they miss the point. Plan 1. I will go off-grid and outsmart the system. Cross-examination. Does Revelation describe the test as something you pass with clever avoidance or with faithful allegiance? The record points to worship, not engineering. Going off-grid may change your exposure to certain tools, but it does not automatically solve the worship question. You can hide from a marketplace and still bow in your heart. Plan 2. I will stay neutral. Cross-examination. The whole function of leverage is to crush neutrality. The system is designed to make silence feel like agreement. So endurance is not neutrality. Endurance is loyal clarity. What does that look like in daily life before any final crisis? It looks like refusing small forms of coerced worship now so your conscience is trained later. It looks like noticing what you treat as ultimate. What do you obey when it costs you? What do you fear losing so much that you would trade truth for comfort? Those are not abstract questions. They are the early evidence. This is why Revelation keeps returning to worship. Worship is not only singing. Worship is what you treat as worthy of your obedience, and obedience is often built from tiny compromises. The pressure in Revelation becomes powerful because it targets ordinary life. Buy or sell, participate or be pushed out. So a practical strategy is to rehearse faithfulness in ordinary life. Speak truth without cruelty, resist panic without denial, and keep your identity clear. In Revelation 14, the contrasting picture is not people who solved a code. It is people who belong to the Lamb, whose loyalty is visible. Not perfect people, but steadfast people. Verdict for this segment? Endurance is not a trick. It is practiced loyalty. The more you train your worship to be clear, the less leverage the world has over you when access becomes the bargaining chip.
So here is our final courtroom ruling, stated as simply as the evidence allows. Verdict. Revelation's warning is not designed to make you obsessed. It is designed to make you faithful. The mark is the enforced signature of allegiance. The seal is God's claim of belonging. The number is a clue that exposes counterfeit authority. And the center of the case is worship. Who receives your ultimate loyalty when pressure arrives? If you remember only one line from this entire investigation, let it be this: commerce is the lever, worship is the lock. That clarity protects you from two traps at once. It protects you from panic because you stop chasing rumors, and it protects you from apathy because you see the pattern and take loyalty seriously. The goal is not to predict the future like a fortune teller. The goal is to read the text like a wise witness and live like someone who belongs to God. Case closed, not because the world is simple, but because the evidence is clear. And we leave one open case note on the desk for the next episode. Revelation does not begin with beasts. It begins with churches, real communities under real pressure, and Jesus speaks to them like a commander and a physician. Next time, we open a new file, the 7 letters. We will ask a detective question that hits close to home. When the world squeezes the church, what does it reveal?